they'll order changes to the ordinance, and when they order a change, it's called an engrossment to the ordinance. So this bubble here talks about ordinance engrossment. So if the board orders any changes to the ordinance, then there have to be 2 more board hearings about the change so that people can come in and see what the change is and have a chance to look at that.
Is the word engrossment kind of synonymous with amending it?
Yeah, for us it is, but I've never heard that word used in any other context other than long-range planning, so it just
I've always been
seems like,
confused when I heard that, and I
Yeah.
kind of went, okay, thank you.
it just sounds sort of like somebody's overeaten or something, I don't know, it just sounds really weird.
Right,
But,
it does.
So then the board makes a final decision on that ordinance. So their decision can be either that they'll reject the ordinance totally, like, no, we don't want to do this at all, or they can approve the ordinance as it was originally filed, or they can approve a modified version, the engrossed version of the ordinance. And so they can make one of those 3 decisions. If they decide to approve it as filed or approve a amended or engrossed version, then it's considered approved, and the ordinance will then become effective usually about 30 days after they approve it. So I realize that's all kind of technical and wonky. If you have some questions about this, though,
Isn't there an open season?
Oh, yes, that's great. Yes, there's an ordinance, there's something called an ordinance season, and this is unique to Washington County. No other jurisdiction schedules things like this, but the ordinance, I kind of didn't go enough more into the timing of this. I think I talked about the fact that we usually issue a draft, that long-range planning issues a draft work program for people to start commenting on in January or February. And then there's a 30-day comment period. We usually issue a more final staff report for the board to consider around February or March. And then the board considers it, and a lot of times the board will adopt the work program like around March or April. So at that point, ordinances can start happening. As soon as the board adopts the work program, ordinances can start being created and published or filed. But we do have an ordinance season, so basically ordinances can only be processed between March 1st and October 31st. So this basically means that the ordinance cannot be filed before March 1st. And that the board has to make a final decision by October 31st. If they don't make their final decision by October 31st, if they're in late October right here and they still don't know what they want to do, then the board could decide that they will continue the ordinance to the following year, kind of kick it forward. Because if they don't actually decide to continue it or make a final decision on it by October 31st, it dies. So this kind of gets back to what you were asking earlier about, do projects ever, even if they're a high priority, just keep getting pushed back and pushed back? They certainly could be continued, but if they are a tier 1 high priority project, they usually do get started in 1 year with the hope that they'll get finished that same year. So we have this sort of compressed time that these activities have to happen. The filing, these public hearings, any changes that might be made, and the board decision all has to happen within this March 1st to October 31st window. And that originated, a little bit fuzzy on it, but it originated because we had a person who was a community, who was on one of the CPOs in the rural area. I think this was about 20 years ago. And he was concerned about being able to get to these public hearings that happen and weigh in during times when the weather was really adverse. In the rural area, people are up in the hills, and if it snows, they kind of feel like they can't get down to the county. And so our charter actually has this ordinance season in it, built in, and it's unique. I don't think there's any other jurisdiction that does that.
I heard a little bit of an amendment on that it had to do with there's generally elections that occur, we have our primaries in May and March and whatnot, but we've got the general election, 3 days after, the closeout of this one. And then there was some That was a consideration,
Yeah.
let me put it that way.
The timing works that way, yeah.
Yeah, it's like,
I think it was actually in the early '80s, so it was like 40 years ago that that there was it was the marginal lands ordinance too, so it affected the rural areas significantly. And I'm not sure of all the questions or concerns, but they made the changes late in the year because they had to that year in order for it to take effect. And
they didn't want hearings going on that would cause some liability at the ballot box, kind of. They wanted, everything would be on the table, and then we'll move to the election kind of situation.
I think it's important, the county does business all year. The things that affect the use of land are in ordinance. So things that, like a road, or a proposal to put a new road, or a new trail, or different parking standards, or different standards for somebody to do development, sewers, those kinds of standards that they have to comply with in order to do a development.
Like the density standards.
Density standards, how wide the sidewalk is, what sort of bike lane it has, all those sorts of things that are implemented and effected on the ground, those require ordinances. If it's a new fee or a change in some kind of other, we focus on the ordinances and planning, but if it's adopting a new MSTIP program, that's not an ordinance. That's a fiscal measure, and those occur all year long. But if it's something that affects the use of land, which transportation is a big part of that, then it has to go through our ordinance process.
So I think I just wanted to get a sense of if there are any more questions just about this, and then we would sort of talk a little bit more about whether people in the room have some land use issues that you see that you're particularly interested in, that we should know about.
Yes, and for question, what's a tier 1, a sample?
Let's see. I think this past year, one of the tier 1 tasks was for the county to change some of the regulations that we have in the Community Development Code about group care facilities, because we have outdated, we'd written, the group care facilities that were in the code were written in like the maybe 70s or 80s, and they're very outdated, and they don't comply with more recent requirements at higher levels, like at state and federal levels, for what group care is and what that kind of housing can do. So that was a tier 1 thing. That was a tier 1 task this year because we were sort of so in arrears, and our local regulations were so outdated.
Marijuana sales, for example.
Locations of where those can be
Yeah.
approved. Yeah, that was something that came up, not this year, but previously.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. And like again, if you really wanted to kind of do, if you're curious and kind of wanted to do a deep dive or just get a sense of what all the tier 2 or tier 1 issues were this year, that we can. It is posted on our website, so you could take a look and say, okay, you could see what those were.
Is that one of these websites?
Let's see if it's probably this. I don't think so, because I think, actually, you know what, I think it is, but I maybe tell you after the meeting. I think that on the Stay Informed, on the back side, the work program webpage, I think it probably has posted this past year's work program still on it, so that's where you could see what this past year's work program had.
And the main website for LUT is listed next to the symbol there at the bottom of the page, right? The very last line on the page.
Oh, yes, yes.
And I presume once you get there, you can wander around and.
Yeah, you can navigate these other things, but if you knew there was one specific thing you wanted to do, we put the exact address.
There'll be a lot of those in the minutes.
Yeah.
It's a bit of a confusing website too, so if you're looking for something, sometimes it's easier to call and have a.
That little block where you can type in key phrases and.
No, there's no simple way of finding stuff on the county website.
Well, we do have a search thing, but it's weird.
I use Google to find stuff on the county website.
Yeah.
Nice cup of coffee and sit there and go on a trip.
Poke around.
Yeah, no, the county search engine doesn't work for me anyway, so I would use Google to
County search engine was changed to Google this summer, it should work for you now.
Oh, that works, okay. Should
And
be
I
fun.
have the really, really, really long names of all of the departments. You can go straight to the page and not have to, I've learned. It's easier for our people.
So-
I
so
post it.
Is it Google or is it Element that is doing this for you? I'm sorry.
Willie, I gotta call you on that one. We're not gonna debate that one. So are there, I know we have other questions in the room.
Yeah. Is there gonna be a moratorium for the county on car dealerships? Cause Canyon Road has turned into a shell of what it used to be. It used to be family-friendly businesses. Now, I mean, over the past several years, there used to be a home on 91st Avenue. They bulldozed it to make parking lot space for the car dealers, mini car dealers. I mean, it's...
That
I
is
know
part of
it
our
brings- I know it
CPO.
brings in jobs, but the percentage of jobs it brings in is nothing like what it could be. And it's just with the many dozens of grocery stores that have closed around, not just Washington County, but also nearby, southwest Portland. It's just like, wow, something needs to be done. I mean, Canyon Road, it's a dump. It really is a dump. I mean, it's the last place I would really want to bring a friend. Say, hey, let's hang out on Canyon Road in West Slope. It is.
It's the only
It is an absolute garbage dump. Seriously, and so it's just like, can something be at least okay, moratorium, like, hey, let's stop development of that. Like because there's been cities in Tennessee that have done that. And another question too, the Safeway that's here in Raleigh, Hills by Power Lumber, it closed. It's probably not going to open up as another grocery store. So is the county interested, or I want to see if the county will rechange the zoning to at least allow not necessarily just the mixed use zoning, but even like a light industrial, something to bulldoze it, because underneath that property, there are two creeks. Between the Wells Fargo Bank, there's Sylvan Creek is in a pipe. You've heard of daylighting creeks. Of course, you guys, yeah. So Sylvan Creek is underneath it, and also Fano Creek. And Tigard has been digging up the earth to clean up Fano, because they've been bearing the brunt of Fano's problems for decades. And, I mean, it would be incredible to see something done with, the moratorium for the car dealers and something done about that Safeway there.
The
I mean,
biggest
people put
problem
up
with the
graffiti.
Safeway is that there's a county line that goes through the parking lot. So it's not really Washington County's as much as it is.
It's an urban legend, it's for.
Well, it's still City of Beaverton. It's not
No,
unincorporated.
Portland is between the Dollar Tree store and then the office buildings to the east.
But we're still talking about ODOT, and we're talking about two different
Yeah,
counties,
no.
and it's not anything over which,
The Safeway is
they-
unincorporated Washington County. If you look at that map, it's unincorporated Washington County.
No, it is.
And it's just something, when you think of two creeks to clean up, I mean, in terms of not the county doing the work, but doing the rezoning to encourage someone to buy the property and make something amazing out of
Yeah, I think,
it. Daylighting the creek.
I don't think we've had any formal requests.
It just closed 2 years ago.
Right, I don't think we've had any formal requests to do either of the things that you just noted, but if we did get a request, like, through this process, that's something that we could look at.
I mean, it's Canyon Road, it's a dump.
I don't know about the legal implications of like, putting a moratorium on a certain
No one
business
builds cars in the
category.
Northwest.
It's certainly something that if we got that request, we could take a look at it through the
Yeah.
work program,
Well,
but I don't know whether there are issues with that request or not. During the analysis of the implications of it, that's something we could look at. if we got such a
Murfreesboro,
request.
Tennessee put a moratorium on car dealers.
you could actually get a whole bunch of people that live around all of them that would jump right in on his
Yeah.
cause.
I know
They may
find
want to write an
jobs.
ordinance or approach you on that. So I think that point's been made, and I think it's a good one, because his isn't the only complaint. I mean, they call them the bane of their existence, quote unquote, when they talk about the problems they have with the dealerships not following the rules. really. I mean, they're parking in the neighborhoods, the employees are have to parking in the neighborhoods, to the point of where 92nd had to be restricted to parking, period, to get the parking off the roads. So parking is always gonna be an issue out here.
Right.
The
Because
bright
we've got the
lights,
hills, too.
Bright lights. that-
Yeah, there's a lot of issues, but I totally get, in response to what little I know about it, is when you have property and you own the property, you can get it, following the rules, you can do whatever you want to it. So, but you've made a good point in starting that discussion. I think it's a great discussion, but I'd like to get to some others too. I know you can't solve that tonight,
It's
so
only Crescent Island.
it is the only one, okay.
Well, Shoals Fair, I'd like a sidewalk on the east side, from Beaver to Hillsdale to the county line.
Well, that's something you could submit to them too, because they're collecting information. But Ed, you have some concerns, don't you?
Well,
or-
I talked to Steve earlier.
Oh, you did?
About Garden Home Road and not having pedestrian crossing.
That's your only concern?
That's my biggest concern.
Okay. It's a big one.
Yeah.
And unevenness
You
is
want me to jump in,
huge.
Suzanne, or-
Sure, yeah.
Okay, so a couple of things that this is my favorite graphic, and I try to bring it to public meetings because it explains from a transportation perspective some of what I was talking about. When we talk about the planning effort up here that Suzanne was talking about, what we're talking about is putting things into the transportation system plan. And what that does is it sets the facility, where it's going to go generally, which properties it's going to affect, what kind of facility it is. Is it a road? Is it a trail? Its function, general location, and the need for that facility. You can't just draw a line on a map and call it a transportation plan. You have to identify why it's there and what it does in order to comply with Oregon State land use planning rules. And then the second tier of this chart is it has to be on the transportation system plan in order to receive funding. And so, for example, let me point at the right area, the Garden Home, we call it Beaverton Hillsdale, Shoals Ferry, and Olson, BH Olson Shoals intersection. And we've had a plan on there since at least 2002 for improvements that would reconfigure some of the intersection there. The problem is they're terribly expensive, and they do affect some of that Safeway site, if I remember right. I was going to bring the diagram that we have in the plan, but I forgot to bring the document I was going to bring to share that, because I figured it might be an issue that people had experience with here.
Can you email it to me if it's a document?
In the transportation system plan, I can email you the page
great.
of it if
That'd
you
be
want.
great.
It's available online. I can get it on my phone in a few minutes if you'd like. But and then once it's already prioritized for funding, then it goes into project development. And then we'll go out to the community and ask them about specific issues. How wide should the bicycle lane be? Should we take out Martha's prize rose bushes or the old oak tree in order to fit this road through here? And what are those priorities and how do we deal with them? And then it goes into final design and engineering. What we often do is we get to this engineering and construction. And what we often do is get to this point. This happened with the Olson Road improvements where people, the projects in project development, they said, well, why don't you widen that other road? That would be easier. And it's already made it through these processes. We've already said this is a need. This is something we're going to be doing. We've already gone through a process to identify limited funding for it to happen as a capital improvement for the county. And now we're trying to figure out how to best go about doing it. The decisions above it are really important. And so the thing that Suzanne was talking about was this ordinance process. When we go through that with our transportation plan, nobody really pays a lot of attention, it seems like, until we're out there at this point of project development saying, hey, we're going to put an extra lane on this road. Well, how do we best do it? And then they come back and say, whoa, wait a second, why don't you widen that other road? And so that's just something I like to share with people because of the scope of decision making. We've already made those decisions and funding decisions when we're at the project development phase. There was also a question and or concern about bike lanes and sidewalks. And so this is our updated last month. As best we know, for the arterials and collectors, this shows our inventory. Now, it doesn't show all the local streets, but for the roads that are identified as major travel roads, arterial roads, or collector roads, it shows the sidewalks on the outside in orange and the bike lanes, or their absence, on the inside in blue. And then if they're not present or they're not too standard, it's identified on this map. I'm not guaranteeing it's 100% accurate, but it's a lot better than we had a few years ago. And we try to keep that inventory up. So if you identify something on here that should be different, let me know, and we'll go check it and make sure it gets updated. I see 2 questions. Go ahead.
Can you identify what's going on Garden Home Road, the blue and?
Yeah, so it's the bike lanes stop a little bit past the intersection here with Olson, is what this graphic says. And then it says sort of an intermittent sidewalk or pedestrian path on the north side, which I experientially think there's something not to standard there for big portions of it, some gaps. And the south side looks like it doesn't have anything, and the bike lanes are not complete there. So we do know about those. And so what Suzanne was talking about with the ordinance process and land use, that affects what development is required to do as far as a lot of systems, but the transportation system being one of them. And somebody, I think it was you, mentioned to me there is a development proposed, and I'm going to just generally circle the area. I believe it's south of Garden Home, and they're putting in a few new homes. And my understanding is they'll be required to bring their frontage of Garden Home up to current standards as part of that development. And I'm not sure the exact extent of that or how that's going to work out. And sometimes that becomes an issue. Sometimes there's a tree there that's historic. It's been there for 70 years and it's a great big tree and people want to save it. And those are sometimes complicated decisions that end up going through that development code and land use process. So that's the importance of understanding what those requirements are and why it's important to make sure that we keep them up to date. Lots of questions. Did you have one in the back, sir?
Yes, I did. There's it's a very obvious section, Beaverton, Hillsdale there, west of the multiple corners, the black section right there. Why does that adjacent property owner, they have been attempting to do some development there for, I'll say 10 years. And when they went through and put in sidewalks, there is an asphalt section there with a chain link fence. It is not a standard sidewalk. How long is it going to be? I mean, it seems to me that they have found a way to not fulfill their obligation, and by they, I mean the state, the county, and that landowner, to complete that section of sidewalk. Now, they have no problem completing it for the roads for automobiles, but they haven't completed it for the two-legged
I don't know the story about why the landowner has what sort of development they have.
And then they let it lapse, and then they did some other things, and it turns out that there's lots of problems there in terms of feasibility for development. And then the people who have to move along that street there are left to suffer. I mean, I'm kind of just bemoaning this, but it's you can see by its standing out there as a blemish, you kind of go, what's happening?
Is that what you mean, the gap?
Exactly.
Yeah.
What's happening?
And one of the things, and so one of the trade-offs we always have in identifying a public project is, do we think that the development community is going to be able to implement it for us? And if we think they're going to be able to, then as stewards of public money, let them do it, and we'll use that public money for some other kind of improvement somewhere else.
Right.
So that's one of the trade-offs that we work with.
Let me give a little input on that.
That's all I can say about
When
it.
the state of Oregon rebuilt Beaverton Hillsdale Highway from near the corner there all the way to 217, that one section was left out by the decision of Washington County and ODOT because that developer was going to do that. Then he didn't. Now, the question I have is, do you have a way that you can build that and you simply attach it to their tax bill, and they can pay it off over 20 years or whatever, and it says like, you know, you made a bargain with us, you then pulled that bargain back, and you now have an obligation to fulfill that. I mean, in a perfect world, that's what I would like to
I
say.
really don't know the status of it. We can take a look and identify what's going on there. I really, you know, pick a property out of the sky and
Right,
I just don't have the
No,
background.
I understand that. I just say that,
Typically, no, or we would have done that.
yeah.
I need to pull you
Go
back
ahead.
to Garden Home Road because you
Okay.
were talking, sorry about that, but
No, no.
you were talking about the Southwest 87th, which is 10 houses plus an ADU, and up at 80th across the street
On the north side.
on the north side is a 12-house, 1 ADU going in with a private street. Now, when I sat in the meeting when they were talking about the first 87th, there was to be no improvement, as I recall, on the north side, the south side of Garden Home Road. And now you're saying maybe there is. That'll be a surprise to me. Is that right, Ed? Did they say that?
It was the frontage that would happen with the other development.
They tried to not do a half-street improvement.
Right.
If you're gonna build the house.
Well, how do you not do it when the code says you have to do it? It's like,
Well,
That
what they
was
do is
a
they
good
go
question.
For a hardship relief.
And look at all
But-
on 87th or on Garden?
It's on Garden Home
So-
side of
So
87.
what I barely remember from the development meeting was that because it would have disrupted the street, the street profile for an unusable amount of distance. Their frontage along Garden Home is actually rather small. What's going to happen on 87th is rather sizable. But what's on Garden Home is relatively small, and to bump it, to go to the full setback there, and then back in, and somehow make all of that line up would not have made sense. So
And they're
I think
making
that
them use existing roads to get in and out on the 87th one.
Amazing. But what I was gonna say is I think on Garden Home, they're probably being required to post bond or something for future development whenever,
Yeah,
something.
sometimes.
But it's not very much money. It's only $65,000. And there's no way in my mind that they could do what they're saying they're going to do for $65,000 if trying to fix that Crash Corners is another $40 million. So it seems like a drop in the bucket. Anyway.
So, quick question. Do you or somebody in your department know what the ultimate alignment and grade is of Garden Home Road?
Good question.
So
And across
I
that.
don't know if anyone does, but what we do have is, I can point to, is this is our, so that's an inventory of existing facilities, and I also brought, if you were curious, capital improvements that we have going forward or have been completed recently, and then maintenance improvements that we have going forward or completed recently. And then here I also brought the transportation system plan for the area for the roads, not the ped bike network. I brought the inventory instead. But for the roads, so Garden Home is designated as a 3-lane arterial. The entire segment that you guys have been referencing. I brought it for the general area of CPO3, sort of zoomed in, so it shows the functional classification, what the road, how it functions in the network, and then it shows the ultimate number of lanes that would be needed for that road long term. So if somebody is developing along Garden Home or any road, they have to look at the classification and the number of lanes and identify how much setback they have to have, as well as then the next step after setback would be dedicate the property, and then finally, if it's works out, it would be to actually build their half street frontage improvement or more. I brought that for the CPO3 area as well as the county. I want to make sure these questions here got answered, and then I'll get to you, sir, in the blue shirt. I saw you next, and then in the back. You have a question?
Well, I got a follow-up to the road designations, and that is, what is the review and/or public input process for changes of road designations?
So we've gone through that countywide multiple times. Most recently, we updated it countywide. Last adopted was 2014. And we kind of have an annual or biannual take a look and make sure we're consistent with other plans. And if something did come through in the work program, we'd take a look at it and see, what was the appropriate designation to have there.
But it's primarily an internal process.
Well, when we update the plan or portions of the plan, then we go out and have a number of public meetings. I forget the exact number we went to in 2012, 2013, and 2014, but it was dozens. And I think we've been to CPO3 a number of times with transportation issues. Diami was here at CPO3 last in May of 2017. And he talked about our transportation system planning process then. I know he brought the same graphic. He had a computer and display, so I actually was able to look at what he had when he came out. Then blue shirt, then green shirt in the back, and then back to...
And then we're going to be out of time.
And we'll be... I'll stay. It's fine.
Well, Garden Home
Go
Rec
ahead.
Center.
Never mind, it's fine.
Oh, you sure? And green in the back?
You don't know this, but I'm with Quake Up. Earthquake resilience.
I did the thing under my desk this morning at 10:18.
Love it. Shakeout. And so part of my interest is, and I know that the governor also brought out a resiliency 2025.
Mm-hmm.
And tomorrow I'm going to be recorded by TVC TV by one of their programmers, and they are going to be asking me about are things improving. And I always am the optimist, and I know because of our Quake Up programs, because the county's agencies, they participate in this land use, transportation, various others. Is there a map that shows the either bridges or culverts that have been seismically retrofitted, and new bridges or culverts that have been built to seismic?
I can look and see where we're at with that. I think we have some of that information at least.
And then the secondary part is the plan of what's done, what's to be done in the near future, let's say 5 years, and then sort of completions or dates. Yeah, I'd like to see a multi-map of something so that, because transportation is going to be one of the worst things. It's because if you can't get out of Dodge,
Yeah.
you can't get out of Dodge.
Yeah.
And we keep seeing this disaster worldwide, but just recently we keep seeing the same disaster of some people decide to stay back, and then they're complaining or upset because no one's coming to get them. And it's because nothing works.
Yeah.
And so, but at least if you could drive out,
Yeah.
or bicycle out, or something,
Or walk.
out,
Yeah.
you could at least get to the other side of 5.
You know, all I can tell you really for right now is I can tell you that the county takes it very seriously. And the reason I can tell you that is my office building at the county has been undergoing a seismic retrofit, and we've been displaced to another building while they're working on our offices now, so that we'll have a standing structure after a major incident like that in order to be able to respond to these kinds of things.
Right.
I believe we have that information. It's really part of our maintenance, ongoing maintenance, and bridge and culvert replacement and repair programs. And I'm a long-range transportation planner, so I get into planning for newer or improvements to existing facilities, not so much the upgrade and maintenance and ongoing preservation of those facilities, and including like a seismic upgrade for a existing facility. That would be more of our maintenance and operations issue, unless it came down to the point of an actual replacement of a facility. And we do have money that we have used for bridge and culvert replacements, particularly in the rural area. We have a lot of bridges in Washington County that are in the rural area that are older and have been out there for a long time. And yeah, it's a really important issue for those people out there to make sure that those facilities can still function after a major event.
Well, we have 2 bridges on Fano Creek, just north of Garden Home and 92nd, there's one where you go down 89th and it kind of turns into Bowman Parkway to County Bridge, you know, Fano Creek there. And then the one on 92nd that crosses just between there and Allen at it.
Yeah.
I think a lot of people don't, those are transparent to them. They're not even in their spectrum. They see Allen Boulevard going over 217, and they see other type facilities like that, but and I kind of echo on what Hal was saying, was those are probably the ones that are going to fail, cause floods, and it's gonna, I mean, and I'm not faulting you, I'm just saying that I just don't think there's the enthusiasm or the emphasis from people a lot of times, because they go, oh, that's just so-and-so. There are two bridges on Olison Road as you go down toward Hall from this intersection, and there's one as you go north, and it's like, I know the ones they just built on the north end of Olison Road, just shy of Beaver and Hillsdale. That's been built within the last 7 years, so I presume it is at current or best building practices for what we may anticipate.
Right. I would presume it is too. I agree with you. I
For
presume
$40
it
million,
is.
it better be.
Okay,
So, yeah, I mean, we take it very seriously.
Sure.
It's hard to get people excited about
Yeah.
seismic upgrade of bridges, you know, it's just.
especially if it's a tiny little one in a neighborhood, well,
Yeah.
that may,
There is a PGE station back there too. It's not just a tiny little neighborhood. There was
no, I mean, the
utilities.
bridge is a tiny little one that most people who drive across, they don't even see it.
Yes.
You know.
Well, I'm gonna call a meeting.
I have one quick question. And
All right, go ahead.
For Garden Home Road nominally, looking at a standard 3-lane cross-section for the gentleman and the rest of us, I come up with a 60-foot right-of-way. You know, 3 lanes, bike lanes, and a sidewalk. And after going through the process of Olison Road, I would say that for finding out where the right-of-way is gonna be and what's gonna encompass, just go out there with a tape measure and not get run over, and use the double yellow line and go 30 feet on either side of it. That'll be a nominal swath.
Yeah, I would always check the transportation system plan, because there is a parameters table of how big the paved width as well as how big the ultimate right-of-way need.
But if they're gonna build it, they would build it to the ultimate right-of-way, would
They
they
would
not?
build it,
Okay.
hopefully, to not, well, everything's interim if you wait long enough, but hopefully it'd be at that ultimate
That's
right-of-way.
See, man,
Yeah, so, no, but we do have that ultimate, it's, for our trails, I know it's more than 60, it does depend upon the, you know, how many lanes and the other configuration, but there's more in the right-of-way than you think of normally. So-
Right,
I-
you're talking about people's front porches and trees
Yeah.
and et cetera.
I do want to tell you that the 6 corners up here that you know is starting in 2019, the Multnomah Boulevard 6 corners, they have been specifically asked, the city of Portland, to give us the flow from Multnomah Boulevard down to Garden Home. They were going to stop it at Olson Road, and I asked them to continue it down Garden Home, so you can get a true picture of what's coming from I-5, basically. I mean, it starts there and it comes down. A lot of traffic disperses here, but a whole lot of it keeps going on into Beaverton. And it's, again, I'm going to repeat it, the dark nights, the one, I mean, I'm not exaggerating when I say here's the white line, here is how much room you have before a ditch. And I even shot a video that I've sent out to the county to see, because it's amazing, and there are more homes all the time being added to that I'm feeling the need to just say, this has got to stop before, as CPO chair, that this has got to be decided before we start putting more houses in, because people are waiting so long to get out onto Garden Home from these side streets already, and then you're adding more homes, 10 and 12 homes, where my dream would be 2 or 3 per acre. I mean, it's just jamming them in.
You know, I will say that if they do have the right to develop their land, they're allowed to do that. And so then we have
But
to
how can
figure
a
out
private
how-
road for 12 homes further up Garden Home Road be okay on one side, but it's not okay on the other side? This,
So,
but anyway, it's
couple
a
of issues
nightmare.
there, but what I've heard is a crossing Garden Home.
Would be
is-
nice.
is something, and that's not a
Impossible.
land use decision, that's a project decision. And so that's something I'll take back and talk to our bike ped coordinator about. Hopefully she'll be able to come back to you at some point, it'll probably be 2019.
Yes.
Before she gets back, given your monthly meeting schedules, and talk to you about it. And I don't know what that's gonna look like, and I've also heard a need for a bike lane and sidewalks on Garden Home. And one of the issues there, of course, is how to put it at the ultimate, so we don't end up with a throwaway
Well, and they
project.
told us
So that's-
there's an elevation of 20 feet difference at times from one side of the
Yeah,
road
they-
to the
they-
other.
they-
So there you can see the problem.
Yep.
Oh, sorry, Pete, I'm going to end this now. Thank you for your participation and your leadership, and
I'll be here if you guys have